Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I know there's a lot of distractions on this great show floor, so we appreciate you taking a few minutes coming in, sitting here, and learning about continuous testing and what we mean by shifting left with continuous testing. We're going to touch on a couple of different subjects. You'll hear, lucky to have a great panel with me that really understands the topic, and hopefully we're going to have time for questions. So start thinking about your questions. If you raise your hand, we'll get to them. Okay? Let me start off by introducing our panel left to right. To my far left, we're not going to hold it against him that he's a Seminole. Okay. Adam Dixon from Cox, right?
Yes.
Adam, welcome. To Adam's right is Grav, and they took the names off here, so we don't have your last name, Grav.
It's your first test of the day.
Yes, they blew me out.
Gaurav Garg from Groupon.
You're going to need to talk louder. I don't know if they heard you.
Gaurav Garg from Groupon.
Do you hear Garv? Yeah. We turned him up a bit. Okay. Sitting next to Garv is Dave. David, introduce yourself.
David Wayland with a Fortune 500 financial firm.
Close enough. And then finally, Anif, you
Yes, Anav Durrani from Cigna Healthcare.
from Cigna. Okay, so let's first kick, and by the way, my name is Alan Schimmel, editor-in-chief of DevOps.com, and thanks for coming. So we're going to talk a little bit about continuous testing, and what do we mean by continuous testing? You know, when I first started DevOps.com about 4.5 years ago, we launched, and this topic of continuous testing came out. First of all, many QA people wanted to shoot the DevOps thing in the foot because they thought it was going to be an end of QA as they knew it. And the question became, well, how can you continuously test? You can't continuously test, but what do we really mean by continuous testing? Adam, you want to take a first crack at that?
Kind of puts me on the spot right off the bat, but I'll try. I think it's important to recognize continuous testing in its environment within the continuous delivery or the continuous integration arenas. And so the continuous testing concept here is the ability to test as early as possible within the cycle so that you can actually have a successful implementation of a continuous integration and continuous delivery cycle.
Everyone agree?
I agree. I've been thinking about the definition for quite a while, and just to add on to that, I would say it's to reduce the mean time to validating a change. If I were to just basically describe it, there's so much behind it, but simplest.
That's a great mathematical sort of equation definition. Rav?
For me, it is about how we continue to increase the rate of innovation while balancing the customer experience and the stability that our customers expect from us. So continuous testing is, for me, a way to break the testing into smaller pieces, more frequent testing that helps us increase the rate of innovation without breaking the site or mobile apps.
David?
And for me, what I tell my developers is scan early, scan often.
Yep.
So every time you do a check-in, you should be doing a scan.
So let me help the audience try to define it by what I think continuous testing is not, right? Continuous testing is not that you're running tests 24/7, every second of every day of every month, right? That's not the continuous we're talking about here. The continuous we're talking about is that we can be scanning at any time throughout that software development life cycle. And as Gaurav mentioned, this concept of, it's an agile concept, right? We're going to try to break these tests up into smaller chunks or smaller batches so we can complete them faster, get our feedback loop, fix whatever needs to be fixed, test again, right? We can take it to the equation that we heard here, test fast, test often, but continuous doesn't mean that people have this mindset of like a speedometer or a meter just running like this. That's not what it is. Inherent in this idea of continuous testing, though, is automation, right? And I think you mentioned it. what David, you mentioned. So let's talk a little bit about automated testing, right? Anybody want to do a quick definition of what automated testing means to you guys? David?
For me, I look at it, I came from the app dev world before I went into AppSec, and test-driven development came out about 15 years ago-ish. And I look at it now as security-driven development. Your automation, your security should be built in at the very beginning so that you can scan quickly, and automate your, not only scanning of your individual code, but automation of your deployments themselves.
The way that I would describe it is, I've seen patterns where teams say they have automation in place, but it really is manually automated, right? So it's not fully automated. There's steps that they take to automate or get the automated test running. And so the term is overloaded. It can mean different things for different people. So I usually use the term unattended, where it's triggered based on some dynamic means, and at the end you get a result which you don't have to go back and validate.
Yeah, I got a chance to listen earlier at one of the presentations by CA about what they're doing in the continuous delivery space, and their concept was automate the automation, and that's probably the most key element to this, is that you got to be able to just, if you're doing this and you're doing it in a mature way, you're kicking something off that's going to take you through as much of the stream as humanly possible without any interaction if you can. Automate all the things.
Gaurav, you want to chime in?
For me, I resonate with the pyramid picture that CA has shared and several other speakers have shared, where you talk about really high value tests running in a manual fashion. Those could be your user experience tests or mobile app tests, but everything else you want to automate and drive them down the pyramid, be it through unit testing, component level testing, system integration testing, or API testing. So continue to look at how your test pyramid is shaping up and drive the number of automated test cases into the lower half so you can have really high value tests run through manual automation.
I'm going to add on that real fast too, because I'm spot on and I love that. And it gives a chance for the proper tests to be run in the proper location. And that's one of the things that we try to talk about a lot at my company, especially in our newer initiatives for our path to production, trying to get everyone on the same page. It's so important that we see some of the teams that will sometimes run a full automated test suite in their functional environment and move it into our integrated environment, and they'll run the same test suite. And we say, you're doing it wrong. There's a time and a place to do each of this type of testing, and it's important in a good mature model that you have the chance to do that automated unit testing and API testing in the proper locations, so that you can do your most important testing or your biggest, highest risk testing earliest on in the cycle, so that you have the least impact or possible negative impact as you go on with the process.
Let me try to boil this down a little bit though, because if you guys are going to take one thing out of this panel, I'd like you to take this home with you. When we talk about automated testing, when we talk about automation and DevOps in general, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to automate 100% of everything we're doing. A, it's probably impossible. B, it's probably impractical. And C, it's just stupid, okay? When we talk about automation, what we're talking about, and it's not, I was over at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in San Francisco Monday and Tuesday, did a panel on DevSecOps with John Willis, who's one of the guys who kind of started the whole DevOps thing. And John said something about automation. He said, automate what should be automated, but don't automate what shouldn't be automated, right? So you touched on it by saying, hey, let's pick the right things to automate. Let's pick those lower level things that can be automated, right? And free us up to do things that we just can't automate, right? Now, sounds easy, like everything with DevOps, it sounds easy, but it's not so easy. The hard part is figuring out what you can automate, right? You know this here, Gil, right? You can't automate it all, but if you can figure out what you could automate, and again, depending whether we're talking about unit testing or security testing or code testing, you know, you're gonna have different percentages of what can be automated. But don't don't strive to automate everything. Strive to automate everything that should be automated. And it sounds, it's a subtle word, semantics, but it's not. It's the key to success here. I've seen too many companies, as you mentioned, get too hung up in just trying to automate everything, and they're trying to automate things that shouldn't be automated. When we talk about what should and shouldn't be automated, though, security always rears its head, right? So my background is I spent 15 or more years in the security space. And I think it's the most important thing in the world. And it is, right, Adrian? But when we talk about automating security, people get a little freaky, especially the security people. I don't know whether it's because they feel threatened for their jobs or they just feel security is way too important to be automated like that or something else. But David's going to talk to us a little bit about it. Sure. Security automation.
Security automation, not only can it be done, but DevOps actually makes it easier to do. The one thing that I'll say is when you're automating your security, the security team needs to own that automation. And what that does is if you do the build definition and you drop that build definition into DevOps, then the security team says, we know that you're scanning the things we want to be scanned and everything's being included. And we own that aspect. We don't own the DevOps pipeline, we own the security specific piece. And same thing, automate what should be automated. There are certain things we don't automate our dynamic scans right now. Why? We want to have control over when they're run and in what environment they're run against. So it doesn't make sense right now to automate dynamic scans. Static scans, automated through the entire stack, from developers checking in code to environment releases to production releases.
So I'm interested enough. Yeah. Cigna, where are you guys on automated security scanning specifically?
So our model's slightly different, where although our security team is responsible for the products, the definition of what or how we should scan and what the profile should be is a collaboration between our development teams and our security teams. And with the goal of having gates in place so that if there's critical issues that are being identified, vulnerabilities, that we can remediate those vulnerabilities at the time of build. Again, the goal, going along the theme of mean time, right? So it's mean time to identify, reduce the mean time to identify a vulnerability, but then also reducing the mean time to remediate a vulnerability. The other thing is, so that's static scanning, right? And then for dynamics, binary scanning, we typically would scan at the time of post-build, but then also at the time of deployment, at post-deployment, to ensure that any third-party libraries that we're pulling in are certified, right? And so that whole process is in place, but not for every single application. We're working through that as we speak. The other thing that we're doing is, I think about security testing. As much as these scanning tools will be able to identify these issues, I also think about the developer being smart enough to understand that my application, this variable that I have as part of this API, is going to take a certain range of values. Some are business rules, but then also there's an expanded the expanded range based on the variable, the type of variable. So how do I break that API? How do I break that function, right? And that should be a mindset that needs to exist within a developer's approach, right?
So you're at the heart of DevSecOps there, which is how do we make security everyone's responsibility,
right,
and make that developer security conscious like that. It's probably another panel.
Yeah.
But sticking to the test, and security testing aspect of it, you mentioned something else, and that is testing third-party components, right? So, we've all heard of Equifax and Struts 2 and how many countless others before that, where it wasn't the code that a particular developer on your team actually wrote. It was that third-party component, which makes up sometimes 70% or more of the applications we're using, right? Where those vulnerabilities are the ones that wind up biting us, right, and do it. And this is something where, frankly, we can do a good job. There are a number of tools right? David, you would know that we could scan third-party components with, and that's something that really can be put right into your continuous integration pipeline, automated, done. There's no reason we shouldn't be deploying code that has vulnerable components in it. When we talk about doing that, though, we're really talking a little bit about shifting left, right? And so this is a concept that I want to explore with the panel about a bit. But before we do, how many of you think you have a good definition of what we mean by shifting left? Cool. The rest of you, not so much. Okay, who wants to give the definition of shifting left? Gaurav, I'm going to pick you.
Yeah, I can start. So I think the principle here is to detect issues as early as possible in the life cycle of software development. And there are studies out there that say that if you find a defect in production, it costs you 30 times to fix that defect compared to if you had found it during the requirements stage or during the coding stage. So shift left for us is to continue to push the boundary around how we can find issues as early as test-driven development, unit testing, component testing, system integration testing. But we also have a big focus on shift right, if I can speak to that. A lot of times we do not deploy software in a continual deployment fashion. And we stop at continual delivery, which means software has been tested and it's ready, but we know that there are differences in test environments and production environments. There are other things happening in production that call for some sort of approval before you would actually push the button and push software into production. So at Groupon, we care for availability and performance a lot, and we have put a significant amount of focus on shift right. And we do three things for that. One, for every change that happens in production, we have a low barrier to change, but we have a high degree of testing. So we do about 40 to 50% of our testing is part of smoke test. And we continue to raise the bar there. More and more of functional tests need to become part of smoke test. Second, we look at critical parameters in production, like error rates, response times, latency to the customer, and we check if the change has really elevated any of those parameters beyond the thresholds. So if we are starting to violate SLAs, we stop the canary deploys. The canaries do not move forward. And if those SLAs are still within the range, we push forward and deploy automatically. So we have this feedback loop that is associated with a change that tells us how the change is going to perform after it's pushed through. And third, we have taken a lot of our tests that are in the shift left side, and we have started putting them as functional tests that run all the time in production. The way we do that is by containerizing the tests, so they can be built anywhere and run anywhere. So all of our functional tests are either URL checks or Selenium tests, and they run in production constantly, giving us a real idea of how our customers are experiencing Groupon on the website as well as mobile app. And we have actually seen the results in a great way. Our mobile app is rated #1 in retail at 2 million RPM, 2 million requests per second.
Wow.
SLA. That's pretty high volume. And by investing in shift right, we are seeing those results.
Anybody else want to, Arnav, you have something to say on shift
Yeah,
left?
and I appreciate you bringing up the concepts of shift right, because when I was at Orbitz, we did something similar where we would run a set of tests in production, right, to validate changes, because we knew that every time somebody does a deployment to production, there's a slew of activity by our QA team, some of our business folks to validate those deployments, right? And those smoke tests that you speak of, right? Those are also automated to ensure that we can get quick feedback. The other point of that, right, as part of the whole broader continuous testing concept, is that we ran those tests every so often in production, not necessarily to validate the functionality, but was more along the lines of looking at, what's the error rate or response time, right? So if that crept up a bit, then aside from the monitoring that we had already in place, this would be another way that we would be able to validate it.
David, anything on specific to security maybe?
You know, for ShiftLeft, one of the things I also focus on is not just the testing aspect, but the training and awareness. People aren't going to internalize security until they understand why it's important. And you can tell a developer, hey, it's important, but until you show them a SQL injection and actually see that you can get all the data out of the database, then they're going to understand it. And that kind of goes to one of the points made a little earlier. When you're doing your APIs, when you're doing your software development, we need to make a cultural shift from blacklist to whitelist. The developer knows what should be coming in. If you're doing a zip code, there should never be an alpha in there. It's all numeric. So you should whitelist it, run a regex against it, and have it be just straight numeric, maybe a dash. That type of thing. And if we can start to do that, that's a shift left as well, where the developers, when they're actually writing the code, are implementing security by doing things in a proper way.
Adam, I don't think I gave you a chance to talk.
I hope to jump back on that in a minute because I've got some questions about that and it's interesting. I will say on the shift left though, kind of to reiterate the concept of how not only do we see the value in terms of finances and everything if you can get it earlier on, catch some of these issues earlier on, but there's also other benefits out of this that come from how many people are dealing with ugly environments right now, bad databases, corrupt stuff that you, right. So if you're doing shift left, one of the things that comes out of that is actually a cleaner, better place to live. If we can do that testing so much earlier on and recognize the issues that we're going to have in a more isolated environment, an isolated way, then by the time we get to that first level of integration, when you really are starting to interface with some of the teams around you, then you're going to have a much more effective integration. And if you do have an issue there, your rollback is a lot more is easier to happen, and you really understand where the issue is coming from, so it's easier to fix right off the bat. So not only do we see the value when we get out to production in terms of monetary, but we really see a lot of other benefits out of shifting left too.
There's some great answers here. Because so few of you actually understood what we mean by shift left though, I feel like I need to just put a cap on it by giving you what I use as my definition of shift left, and it makes someone, I'm not that bright, and even I understand it. So the way I think you got to look at shift left is you look at your software development life cycle, right? SDLC, right? And if we think of our planning and architecting of the software we're going to build, starting here on our left hand, right, as we read left to right. And then we go from building and from planning and architecting software to developing code, right, committing code, testing, integrating, deploying, managing post-deployment, moving right. When we talk about shift left, we are moving many of these things that happen further to the right back here to the left. Now, of course, we can't shift everything left, right? Because then we would have sort of like a big bang moment in time, and it doesn't work. But things like security testing and security awareness, which is what David's talking about, things like Gaurav spoke about. I'm drawing a blank on your name.
Anuf.
Anuf. Things that Anuf spoke about. These are all things that we can move further into the left of our software development life cycle. And so when you hear the term shift left, and it's going to be a term you're going to hear all over here, that's what people are talking about. Moving things further earlier into the development life cycle. And now when you think about it that way, you start understanding what Gaurav's talking about with shift right, which is some of the things we learned that we're shifting left, they need to take place post-deployment as well, which is, again, Anuf, you was talking about it when you were at Orbitz, right? After we deploy, we still have to do this sort of testing. But that being said, shifting left in the software development lifecycle is such an integral key piece of the DevOps way, if you will, the DevOps mindset. All right? All right, so we've defined shift left. We've defined a little bit about what we mean by continuous not really being continuous. We've defined automation as best we can, I guess. So now, what does this all mean to testing, right? Does it mean we don't need QA anymore? Is QA dead as we know it?
Yes. No.
The conference is official now that we got someone to say the title is QA dead. Congratulations, we got there.
Is QA dead? Is it?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think there's a place for QA and for QE or SDETs or test engineers, and we have to recognize the fact that the way that we did QA 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or even up until 5 years ago is going to be different from the way that we're going to be doing QA the next 5 years, 10 years. Things are moving faster, right? It's not about the, I used this analogy yesterday, it's not about the big fish eating the small fish, it's the slow fish, or the fast fish eating the slow fish. And so it's critical for us to be able to evolve and change how we approach testing. Continuous testing is one way of doing that, right? And the skill set behind it, whether it's QA or QE, needs to evolve to meet those needs, right? The demands of the business. So it's not dead, right? But if we don't do anything about it, then you're allowing it to go down that path.
Adam?
I find it interesting because if we think about this question from 5 years ago, everyone is going to start at the requirements. And they're going to say that your product owners are going to want you to test this much, but they only are going to give you this much time to test it. Everyone remembers that analogy every time, right? What we're doing now is we're getting smarter about the way we're testing so that we can finally test this much. So the more that our standard QA process gets intelligent and more mature like this, then the more that we can actually test. So there's still so much more. They still want us to test this much, and we still have this much time. We're just doing a lot better than we did before.
I agree. Gaurav?
Yeah, to me, QA is not dead at all. I think quality assurance is, in fact, at the highest we have ever been, because now our customers, the millennials, the new generation, they expect a very high degree of quality. They expect high degree of availability, performance. So assuring quality before product hits the market will never be dead. So in terms of discipline of quality assurance, we are investing probably more, but we are changing the way we are doing it. We are now spreading it across multiple functions. We are making development own it. We are making product management own it in terms of better requirements. We are reskilling the traditional test engineer role to now be able to do their job in a smarter way.
Yeah.
We are getting them to be automation engineers rather than manual test engineers only.
Right.
So we are, just like what IT is doing to other industries, continuous testing and DevOps is doing to our own industry, which is making us more efficient, making us smarter.
So we're always going to need QA for the simple fact that there's people that do a great job of testing, and developers aren't those people. But I think the idea of a gated QA process where you go into some QA cycle and that stuff happens, that's going away, and it's getting to the continuous QA thing, where when you do your deployment, the unit tests and the tests that QA has automated because they think a certain way gets implemented at that point as opposed to a gate.
So for what it's worth, my view is if QA is dead, so security, and so is DBAs, and so is anything that we could put a little bit of automation on, right? Because this, one of the most overused words that I hear in my life is not in my life, but within my tech bubble that I live in, is machine learning and AI. Right, it's going to change the world. Bill Gates and a bunch of other very smart, rich people have said if we let it happen, it could be the end of humanity, right? I don't think it's the end of humanity, nor do I think AI and automation and these things are necessarily the end of QA either, or security, or any of the other things we do. But what I think what we as humans have to understand is, let the machines do what the machines can do. Let us automate what we could automate. And you know, this concept of, oh, it's going to free you up to do higher level things sounds kind of Star Trek, right? I don't have to have any money to spend. We'll live in Starfleet headquarters over in San Francisco, all will be well. But that's not necessarily the truth. But it does. I know QA people. They read our stuff, they comment, they write. There's a ton of stuff that we cannot automate. Could still be doing maybe continuously within a DevOps environment, an agile environment. But they're not going away.
I mean, I had a team that delivered code daily, twice a day at Orbitz, and we had QA on the team. And not everything was automated, right?
I don't know anyone where any environment where everything is automated.
Right.
So it's never going to go away. It means to change though. But do we have any QA people in the audience? Right, you're still working, make a living, it's good. But what it means though is you've got to change. You've got to change your skill set. And if we can, if you guys want to jump in on this, what kind of skill sets do you think they need to thrive?
Before I jump on that, I want to give you an analogy that just came to me, so this might sound terrible on the recording later. But being that we're being led by an editor-in-chief of DevOps,
okay.
I'm drawing the analogy quickly of, did spell check cause you to be able to fire any of your proofreaders?
No, but I'm looking forward to the day that we can automate writing articles, because we'll get rid of writers real quick, but no, just kidding, just kidding. But no, we haven't. It's made my writers not have to worry about spelling, right? People type faster and they think faster and stuff. But thoughts on this? What kind of skill sets does tomorrow's QA people, what kind of skill sets do you think they need?
Well, I think the skill set that's needed is the skill sets that's there right now, logic and critical thinking, and being able to get outside the box. I think a lot of the things that QA is going to be doing in the future, if I look at the crystal ball, it's the edge cases. You automate the things that are the 80%, but you're going to spend 80% of your time trying to figure out that other 20%. And that's the part that can't be automated.
Nope, you're right.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's customer advocacy, understanding a customer's perspective. You're not going to at times get that from an automated script.
No.
And so you need to have the QA function is evolving towards that, right? Where you have the cream of the crop within your organization think like that already, but that's what needs to be more pervasive across the QA domain.
What if I told you there are tools available now that try to mimic that they look at a user interface, they look at an application as a human would, and try to understand, would a human understand this? Does it make sense to a human's view to, that it does that? Do you think we could ever get there?
I would probably have a QA validate that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. What kind of hard skill sets though? Because one of the things I always hear, especially for ops people, right, is, hey man, these ops people, they got to learn to code a little bit. They don't have to be the best coder in the world, and they don't have to learn every language, but they got to know script. They got to have a better handle on scripting. They've got to know some of the languages that this stuff is coming in. QA people too, coding?
Yeah, so I'd say nowadays my company has pretty much completely shifted away from the hiring of manual testers, and the new role that is titled SDET, Software Developer and Test, and they have to have that ability to to be doing some of that coding. It's just become important. And I think, though, that there's a big win there at the end of the day, because it's also erasing a lot of the gap that existed for so long between QA and development. Now that they're actually working together a lot more often to be able to build out those unit tests for the developers, things like that, we're seeing everything speed up because of that skill set. But it's still that QA mindset. One of you just said it a little bit ago, was you. The QA mindset is very different than developer mindset. I do believe that. And that's something that you're always going to be looking for in that role.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think QA having development skills, but also knowing about what's happening in the industry and creating awareness about tools. There are a lot of tools that are out there that can help automate things, so you don't have to code everything from scratch. So the journey QA traditional manual testers can take is, before they suddenly turn around and become automation developers, is to really familiarize themselves with tools like Selenium Grid for functional testing, or API test automation tools, do mobile testing for Android, iOS. There are a lot of automation tools for that. So shifting their skills in a gradual fashion to more awareness of tools, then using the tools, and then coding into tools, and then eventually coding outside of tools in a more native way. I think that would be a skill that engineers need to take.
David?
And I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian approach to this. I actually would prefer the QA folks not to have software development coding. And the reason why is simply, if you know how to code in the language, you know what the language can and can't do, which is potentially going to limit you on what your test cases are. I have had QA people come back and say, well, I did Control, Shift, drag, and click, and it broke. I'm like, why would you do that? The language doesn't support that. They said, well, it just made sense and I kind of wanted to do that. That's what users do. So I don't want to have that limitation of, I know the language can't do that, so there's no way that I'm going to test that. So I think that knowing software development is great, but I would prefer my QA folks to not know the language in depth for that reason.
Naf, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you,
David.
right? Because it's QE, SDET, test engineers, their function, their mindset, their approach is different than a QA. And I want them to complement each other, but not overlap with each other, right? And it's, again, I referenced Orbitz, this is where it worked, I had a set of QA that were looking at scenarios very differently than our quality engineers and our developers. They would work together within a Scrum team to ensure that they're thinking about the right scenarios as this team automated this, but at the end, all the exploratory testing that needed to be done was being done by that QA, and we did it in a manner where it was like, somewhat, if you think about within a Scrum team, it was like crowdsourcing within the Scrum team. So a very different mindset, very different approach. I would rather keep them separate. As much as I want QA to be dead, it needs to be separate.
But they dead but separate, or separate but dead. That was like a thing.
That works out well.
All right, guys, we have about 5 minutes left, and there's one other big topic I want to hit, and then we'll take questions. So I think we would be negligent if on a panel about continuous testing and shifting left, if we didn't talk about sort of this new, I don't know how new it is, but it's certainly becoming a very popular methodology of testing, and that's testing as a service, right? Are you guys using testing as a service at your organizations? No? No? No?
Used to.
Used to. Well,
we're ready to hear about it.
Well, we have here, I know CA bought a company called BlazeMeter that does, basically testing as a service, right? We also have a partner here, Sauce Labs, Selenium, testing as a service. There's another one there, Applitools, testing as a service. This seems to be more than a trend where I don't want to say we're outsourcing testing, because you still need QA people, the interface and everything. But the infrastructure, the expertise, a lot of it is just done as a service now rather than that in-house. Why'd you get rid of it?
So there were a couple of things. I think I would, if I continued in the role that I was in, we eventually would have came back to it, right? So I'll give you an example. Cross-browser testing and combination of, various OSs. We automated the whole process, spinning up the machines in various browsers, various OS combinations, and leveraged, at the time it was Web Trends to see where we would target our tests, right? Our automated scripts. Mm-hmm. That worked at that time, right? But scaling that till, for today, if you think about the combinations that exist today, you have to make a decision on whether you would support that combination or not. But to be able to scale and to be able to maintain that scale is going to be very difficult. So the likes of Sauce Lab makes sense.
Right.
Another example of this would be, testing, crowdsource your testing, right? And we did that for mobile testing, but what we ended up doing was, the concepts of eating your own dog food and having our own development and various functions within our company take on the responsibility to validate, let's say, a mobile app. It brought the sense of ownership to those individuals who are testing, right? And so you give somebody a free lunch, they'll do a lot of things for you. And so we're able to bring folks together and do something like that. So I would say there's pros and cons to it. It all depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Where you need to scale, it doesn't make sense to do it yourself, right? Where you want to validate certain changes every so often along the way, then you can do it internally. But it all depends.
I would like to add, maybe change my answer a little. We do leverage testing as a service from a partner for mobile testing. So externally, we would roll out our mobile app every other week. But internally, we have a version of the mobile app that we get as employees every day. So mobile app gets updated every day. And what we do is, as the mobile team upgrades the app, we have a team in Romania that validates the functionality during our nighttime. So by the time we come back next day morning, we have a functional app, and that is another way of continuous testing with certain degree of automation and manual testing mixed together.
Adam, any thoughts on that? No? David? No? All right. Continuous testing is a thing, though, and it's real, and I encourage you to check out BlazeMeter and Sauce Labs, Applet Tools, and some of the other ones here.